call to order the resumption of the workshop from yesterday. I do want to again start. I know Gary's updated me on where we are, but I do want to start because it continues to have a lot of headlines on 66. And I've been on many radio stations and different things, and I wanted to share some data. I'm going to have Charlie update where we are today, significantly different than where we were the last few days. Before he does that, though, let me just clarify a few things, if I might, and adding on to the discussion we had yesterday. I'll start by saying I remind people again that single drivers couldn't use this road legally a few days ago. And so I think we all need to come from that perspective. The algorithm that VDOT has worked on, and I think has done an excellent job, is not only about tolling, but it's about making sure that that data doesn't impact not only the free flow of 66, but they're also very much concerned about other areas. And so the data is just not about keeping flow on 66. So it's a pretty integral part of how the tolling works, because we don't want to, it'd be easy to fix 66. We just say, you know, it's got to be 55 and not worry about anything else. That won't work. Now that's where they start from, traffic operations, and the tolling backs into it. In other words, then you derive what the toll would be based on dynamic pricing. Not what it would be. The action of consumers or behavior of consumers will be the ones that determine that. And so they run various models depending on HOV usage and that's how the tolling would be. That's why we've been very careful not to say exactly what the tolls would be in that regard. Now, I know there's a lot of people out there saying, well, we promised the tolls would be this and tolls would be that. They're also confusing inside the Beltway and outside the Beltway. But I have asked Renly Johnson to go back and look at all the communication over the last few years, because I was on a radio show yesterday with a supervisor from Prince William, who I consider to be an honest critic. We don't agree on stuff. Matt Letourneau, we don't agree on this situation. I'm sorry? Loudon. Excuse me for Loudon. We don't, I meant to say that. I don't know why I said Prince William, because I was thinking of somebody else. But he said he had something from the office, my office, and it could have been me, my deputy, or somebody, that said the tolls were going to be a certain amount. So I don't recall that, but I'm going to ask, Renly's going to go back and look. The only thing I have ever heard us talk about is what average tolls might be. Now, there was a whole political campaign where other people were screaming about $17 tolls, but I think that was outside the Beltway too. But nonetheless, I'm going to go back and look, because if that has been miscommunicated by someone in VDOT or myself, look, I'm responsible, and I'll take responsibility for it. I don't think that's the case, but if it is, so be it. But I know this, we would always have said that would be an estimate, because no one would know until we open the road. And I will tell you, that's the one thing on the algorithm I think that has surprised some of us, is what people are willing to pay to drive on the road. It is not a cap. In other words, it is what somebody would be willing to pay. And I think the first 2 days, that sort of was a little bit more than what we would have anticipated. Doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It just means that's what somebody was willing to pay. Now, because as you all know, it's dynamically priced. In other words, as more people use the road, the pricing goes up to keep that 55 miles an hour going through there. So that is the one thing I think that probably would have, if anybody would have guessed, and I know I'll use myself personally, I wouldn't pay 40 bucks. But that doesn't mean somebody else wouldn't. Now, we don't really know if anybody has paid the peak yet, as I explained yesterday, because both times they lasted over a 6-minute increment and came off. And today, I think we report that the peak has been well under $30. I think it's just been slightly over $20. So what we're seeing is people adjusting. First day was 36% penetration, I believe, of HOV. Next day was 41, at least reported. And so we'll see what today is, but I think people are adjusting. But at the end of the day, what drives that is what people are willing to pay for that privilege as a single driver. Now let's think about what could cause those to go up. Well, more HOV usage, more people using HOV. Hooray! That's what we want. We want more people through the quarter. So hooray, squeezing out the single drivers. That's what the policy is. The other thing that can make it go drive up is people are willing to pay. They're just willing to pay more to keep that, to use that privilege. Now, I've also heard I've gone from Lexus to Lamborghini lanes. I remind people that you don't have to pay anything if you get somebody else in your car. And again, I'll remind you, you couldn't use it at all legally before this date. So those are a couple things that I wanted to bring to your attention. Now, also, one of the questions I got yesterday was whether or not VDOT was going to be transparent in posting the times and the tolls, to which I referred him to the app that Mr. Kilpatrick has already put out there. But what will really matter is, and I see John Lawson back there, is when we go through this weekend and actually do the trips, the actual billing, that's when we'll know what people actually paid, not just what you saw on the sign. And what I've asked them to do is to, we'll post those, and I know that plans are already done, at each gantry, the time, and what actually was paid, and what it costs for various segments of the trip. Now, why is that important? It's important for people to make good decisions, because we know that over half of them, when we went into this, don't go the entire 10 miles. We know that traffic patterns are going to change. So for this to be really a good solution, we got to be transparent so people can make appropriate decisions on what it's worth to them. So the answer to that is that VDOT's already doing it and will continue to make that information available. Another issue that came up was, well, why don't we cap the tolls? Well, I'm not going to explain to this group why that doesn't work, because we've seen all that. But VDOT has said from the very beginning, Charlie and his team, working with the Secretariat, that we're going to, and I was talking to Garrett about this morning, we're going to look at it in 30 days or 90 days, whatever you think is appropriate, or something came up before then. And maybe there's a way to adjust the speed, because it looks like we're averaging over 55 miles an hour. So maybe we can set that target, allowing more people and mitigating some of the tolls. But won't do that unless we make sure it doesn't screw up the arterial lanes. And that gets back to posting all this. So there are some things that could be fine-tuned, but I don't think we should do anything, and I think that we do anything for a while until we see how people, like today, is a lot different than the first 2 days. Today does not make a history make either. But over a month or two, I think we'll be able to see how people use this and make adjustments. So I wanted to say there are things that we can do and will do based on the usage, just like we do on any other traffic. But having said that, from a traffic movement standpoint, it's been a significant success. In fact, I was just talking with one of our operators of transit. They've picked up 60 new people the first day because buses are running on time and transit and out. We are getting more inquiries over slugging, and how that ties into the outside 66 parking rides for people to do. Remember, this was all tied in. So those are things that we would make, whether this was this road or any other, as we see how patterns change and we move things together. A lot of misinformation. I wanted to also inform you that today, Nick is ill today again, but Nick he's going to come out of his deathbed at 11 o'clock. He will be updating the new freshmen that have just come into the House about what's going on, because many are uninformed as to not only how dynamic pricing works, but the political compromises made and how this all goes together. So he will be doing that to better inform them. Look, I've come to understand in my life there are critics and there are honest critics, and I do respect honest critics, but some of the stuff being said just inaccurate. And so we will be happy to point out where that is being inaccurate here. So want to make sure everybody's informed. As I said, everybody can have their own opinions, but not their own facts. And so I want to make sure, I didn't first say that, I forgot, some really good guy said that, and so happy to on that. And that's again why with this issue that Matt brought up, I want to get to the bottom of it in that regard, because I consider him an honest critic in that. Now, one last point that came up, and this was about, I didn't mention yesterday the users, but Dulles Toll Road users have been impacted by going to the, not Dulles Toll Road, the airport, Dulles Airport, not the toll road. In fact, they thought we'd be pulling people off the Dulles Toll Road, but that's a different story because of offering a cheaper ride in. But nonetheless, on the airport, we do not have an exemption for airport. Now, yesterday on the radio, I said that was part of the $50 million. Not in part of the $50 million we invested in payment to use. But politically, there was no way we were going to invest $50 million and they'd be against what we believe was a significant traffic fix in Northern Virginia. So that was a consideration, not to be used for the dollars. It was used to extend the hub and also to help lower costs to attract business. But if we were going to make that type of investment, we thought the issue of incentivizing people coming there should be left to the airport. And we also agreed with them to look at that issue after a year, look at their next economic data they track to see if there was an impact. No guarantee we'd make any adjustments, but it was considered when we decided to make this $50 million investment. Now, I want to make that clear because I got calls saying, oh, the money wasn't meant for that. Absolutely, it was not meant for that. But it was a political consideration in whether or not we could stand up and say, make this investment. Oh, and by the way, you're going to be opposed to another significant transportation issue for Northern Virginia. We would not have been as amenable to making that investment had we not been working together. So, and working together is we'll take a look at it from a year and see what the impact is. There are different opinions. Now, remember, that was hard to enforce. Think about this. You get pulled over, single driver, I'm going to the airport. Now, how do you ever know that? Or coming back. So that was part of the reasoning of the enforcement issue in there. So those are just some of the things I wanted to, it came up in conversation, on radio interviews and press interviews yesterday. I wanted you to have, what we were coming from on. And Charlie, you want to give an update on what's happened today?
Yes,
briefly?
sir. And of course, I'm getting information
literally
by the 6-minute increment.
Yeah.
I do want to reinforce what the Secretary said regarding this project and the 66 inside the Beltway Express lanes. From the beginning, our goal was to provide choices for commuters, to provide safe and reliable travel, and to maximize the person throughput on the corridor. And what we're finding that we are meeting that test of safe and reliable traffic along the corridor. We believe that we're moving more people, but some of that will be being able to add up all the different modes that are traveling down the corridor, and that will take some time. Also, regarding the toll price, we're seeing today that the toll prices are coming down. I'm looking at a chart. We chart each day the toll and the time of day, and it is again trending down even more today. Morning rush hour, we're seeing higher tolls than we are in the evening, and that was expected. But again, we're seeing the toll, the peak prices moderate, and we're going to continue to work to look at how do we maximize this throughput here. As the Secretary said, it may be adjustments in the speed, in the operating speed. It may be that we can tolerate a slightly lower operating speed on average through the corridor. But I also, regarding the tolls themselves, we are not tolling this facility. We're not in the business of making money in the tolling of this facility. So a high toll rate is not what we're looking for. What we're looking for is to create that space that maximizes the throughput on the corridor. And I think that's where I've seen on the news and the media also the discussion and reports about these incredibly high tolls and the cost to taxpayers. It's not our intent to, our goal is not to see how much money we can raise off this facility. Our goal is to maximize the person throughput in a safe and reliable way on this corridor and to offer people choices that they didn't legally have a week ago. So as the Secretary said, we're constantly looking at the data we're getting.
What's the high toll today, Charlie?
We're showing a high toll so far of $23.50, and that's
almost half of what the high toll was yesterday.
And we've got another 15 minutes to go. The other thing we're seeing very clearly, outside the express lane period, we're seeing a significant degradation in speed and overall flow in terms of not just the speeds reducing, but we're getting more disrupted flow, speeding up, slowing down, which are the things that cause further disruption, cause accidents and problems along the corridor. So it's clear to us that if not for this, we would have significant congestion in this corridor all the way through the rush hour.
Yeah. So hats off to, I said beat off, it's off to start. I'll remind you all the other major projects, the disaster that was going to happen as we put them in, 29, can't reform P3s, and I'm not saying we're there, but it's this reaction of change is fairly, unfortunately, typical in what happens with transportation projects. And that's not to diminish any of the significant things we can work on, but I'm not going to be curtailed by overreaction by people who don't understand the process and what we're doing, or have a better solution. I mean, we've said from the beginning, you got a better solution on how to deal with these or other problems, we're all ears. And we mean that. In fact, some of the changes, I'll remind you here, this was a compromise. The reverse commute was going to be originally a part of this project, but as a compromise working with the localities and the General Assembly, that was delayed. There was those who, the expansion, where some wanted to wait until the 3 miles from Boston, up to Boston was done, and others said no, working with Arlington. Remember, it was going to be HOV3, it became HOV2, did we get the out? So there's been a lot of compromise and working to get to this point on something that has been litigated and discussed for decades in that. So to think that we weren't going to, and of course there are those critics of the project that, will remain critics of the project no matter what happens. So we just need, I think, want to try to look at what the data is and let that drive it. I can't control political, whims or whatever, and that's their right. But what we can do is provide the data and make sure we're looking at it from that perspective. So that's sort of an update of where we are, quite frankly, I'm sure this will be an ebb and flow over the next few weeks, but from a traffic management standpoint, it appears that at least we are in the right direction in terms of changing those behaviors. So just want to give you that, and I promise the next time we start, well, I shouldn't promise, but I hope it's not an update of 66 because I think we all are up to speed on that. So where we left, Gary informs me where we left off yesterday. We were through everything but for Nick and Jennifer and myself. Right. Nick is still ill. What we thought we would do is there's Margie is here. Margie Ray's here. She's going to talk about the performance management and target setting. And the VTrans update, just going to have a handout for you to look at, and that when Nick, at the next meeting, he will be happy, or in the interim, to talk about any questions you have, but also he'll go through and make sure there's room at the next meeting to answer questions. I told him I'm sure there was going to be a significant rebellion when I told them we weren't going to have to do VTrans in person. So he's happy to answer your questions. But Marge, why don't you come up and go through this performance testing?
Morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm happy to step in for Nick, although while he says he's on his deathbed, I don't know. I think I can promise you, though, I might be a little more succinct than him today. Do we have the presentation up on the rest of the screens?
Yeah, okay.
It's in the workshop.
So, by way of background, just there's been a national movement that is towards performance-based planning and programming at the same time that Virginia has been under development with our VTrans, all the multiple steps that we've gone through for improving VTrans and planning our projects and prioritizing those needs, and then smart scale as far as helping to derive those investment decisions based off of some of those needs. So we are well positioned already with Virginia, and aligning with how the feds have looked at things in a performance-based planning framework. MAP 21 is the prior legislation, and it required that the states and the MPOs establish performance targets in 4 key areas, and that's the safety, asset condition, system performance, and the air quality. Now, these rules were really finalized all in 2016, but there's been a lot of guidance material that the feds have been developing in the interim. Certainly, VDOT and DRPT have been actively looking at how we will set targets and start managing and meeting the needs of the federal requirements. But we also have legislation that was passed this past year that directs the board to establish targets and to develop those targets, develop and establish those performance targets for our surface transportation program. And so we're looking at now, how do we start aligning what we've done with what the feds are now requiring? So in
Mr. Secretary, I'm sorry,
yes,
Margie, to interrupt you. I really cannot find this presentation. I don't know if others are having difficulty.
It's a separate agenda item, she had to load it separately.
I apologize, Margie.
Sorry.
Anybody, okay, we good? Everybody good?
It's not loading.
Yeah, it takes a few minutes to load, but okay, we're going to continue on, and we can just look at the board, look at the big board up there. So, okay, Margie.
Okay, thank you. As you all are well aware, in December of 2015, the board approved our and adopted the performance measures, objectives really for the VTrans, and that identified our goals, objectives, and the guiding principles that we would use moving forward in development of the other aspects of VTrans. In July, Nick presented to you all the initial baseline performance report, which helped identify some of the trends that we were observing based on those previously identified measures to meet those goals and objectives. What we are finding, though, and have found between the federal requirements, is there really is some overlap between what's already been identified through our VTrans process and what you all identified as was important and how we would measure things versus what the federal requirements may be. And then also there's some differences of what we've identified as important to measure that isn't necessarily required by the federal regulations. There is a requirement, though, on the federal side that we have to establish those targets by May of 2018. And so one of our objectives here today is really looking at how do we move forward in getting to that goal of, or not really goal, that deadline of May 18. So when we look at how it all fits together, we have our performance measurement requirements and performance management, how is our system actually doing, versus our VTrans, that's our planning and our vision of how we move forward, and then certainly any board actions that might support both policy decisions and investment decisions. So we need to be analyzing those policies and investment decisions moving forward, making sure that that's driving towards the outcomes that you all are looking to achieve through our processes and then planning. And if something's not working out, and we're not achieving those outcomes, that we would want to be analyzing and understand why not, and then maybe making midstream adjustments and adjusting or creating new policies in support of that. We can make those changes as we're moving forward with this. So this cycle is just something that, each year we'll be doing, we'll be analyzing and reporting on the results of that at the end of each year, and then we can kind of adjust as we go and kind of rinse, wash, and recycle that process. But another key aspect out of this, in monitoring our performance management, we can start seeing where we maybe have good performance and some policies that might support retaining that good performance, whereas where we have poor performance, identifying some policies and objectives that help move the needle on those areas where we do need improvements. So some of the examples of policies that, one, smart scale and state of good repair, that certainly has been a policy decision of the board that has helped drive those investment decisions. But we also have things like access management and how that might improve some of those VTrans goals like economic competitiveness, safety. We have the Vision Zero, that might improve our safety goal. The UDA planning grants, that can help with those economic competitiveness, accessible and connected places, and the goal of healthy communities and sustainable transportation. So it's those sorts of things that can help drive us to better system performance. So we want to integrate all of this between what we had as our VTrans measures that we've already been looking at and reported to you as baselines back in July, as well as the federal requirements here. And so the next few slides, as well as over the next few months, we want to be looking at how we're going to move and establish each of these targets. So these next few slides really do get into kind of where we are with our current measures that we've had in our baseline report versus those federal requirements, and what do we need to do to get there. We want to make sure that we're taking the time and coordinating those efforts. We also look at this as a very collaborative approach with our subject matter experts within VDOT and DRPT, so that we're coordinating, collaborating, and bringing to you all our recommendations for what proposed targets ought to be. I'm sorry, let me just return to this. With the federal requirements, I just wanted to let you all know that there are some very specific and detailed reporting requirements, and everything is phased, so they not only phased in the implementation schedule, but even the detailed reporting requirements are phased, and so this is something that will be in front of us for a while. So now I just wanted to run through very briefly on each of these kind of the goals that we've established through VTrans, the measures that we've already been using, and some of the federal measures, and some of the recommendations or proposed approach we would have where we would bring together how we have measured maybe a VTrans goal and what we would want to use in the future. So in this situation, talking about the goal of the economic competitiveness and prosperity, some of our goals within this, our objectives rather, were to reduce the amount of travel that takes place during severe congestion. Maybe the percent of peak hour VMT would be how we would measure that, and that's a measure that is what we would have proposed in the past. The federal requirement is to use the second one there as far as annual hours of peak hour excessive delay. And so there's an asterisk besides the ones which are the federally required ones. Where they don't have that asterisk is what we have already proposed through the baseline report from July. So just as some examples of some of the measures that we would look to do, we do have this all tied specifically as a proposal from the perspective of where we were with the baseline report and what changes we might need versus what we might want to retain. And this is generally getting to that. So when we talk about the goal of accessible and connected places, we had such objectives as reducing the average peak period travel time in those metropolitan areas, reducing average daily trip in those metro areas, or increasing accessibility jobs via transit. So we can see that at the federal level, there's only the last requirement there. And so we would certainly use that, but we think it's important that we would want to continue to measure those first two bullets on this page so that we can continue to monitor that and use for that. The goal for safety for all users, I think this is one that's been a little bit easier to transition to in that we've already been measuring most of this, maybe slightly different as far as we combine some of those things. But this would be what would be proposed to use as we would take our VTrans measures and use the federal measures instead. Here's another one that I think is, we have a lot of history here with how we have managed and monitored performance on our pavements and bridges. And so we are looking here that to date we've been measuring things a little bit differently, but we would certainly have to move towards what the federal measurement is and looking at these two categories. A key aspect here that I should have mentioned even before is much of the federal requirement is based on the interstate system and the national highway system. Whereas much of VTrans, we've still been looking at a statewide system. And so we think it's very important that we continue to have that statewide perspective while still having to meet the federal requirements. This one, though, as I said, I know you all have seen reports from Garrett and his team on our performance on the pavements and bridges, and next month we actually plan to bring something more to you that's some of the proposed target setting for that, and I'll speak to that a little bit more in a moment. So when we talk about healthy communities and sustainable transportation, some of our goals there was we wanted to reduce our per capita vehicle miles traveled. We wanted to reduce our transportation-related criteria and the greenhouse gas emissions, increasing some trips, the number of trips by biking and walking. And so we have 2 federal measures that are required here as far as how we would have to measure the greenhouse gas emissions and reducing the pollutants. The top 3 are ones, again, that were VTRAN specific that we would propose we would want to continue monitoring. I really have gone fast. A couple things I think that's really important to understand too is there are challenges with what we're trying to accomplish. Sometimes it's data quality, data availability, especially where we have enough history that we can establish trends such that we can look at those performance targets and what makes sense. Again, we saw some of that when we did our performance report, that there were some areas where we had limited data availability. There's also things that might be out of our control, and so we need to understand and recognize that. And so as we move forward, we definitely will be bringing to you all any of those challenges and risks that we perceive with the data and the proposed targets. But we are looking at, in the January timeframe, that we will, at the next meeting, that we would provide to you all a baseline of the data that we have available for the federal performance measures. The teams are actively working on compiling that data, making sure that it's consistent with those federal measures, trying to do a little QA/QC before we bring it to you, and making sure that we understand any again, of those risks or challenges with the data sets in particular that we have. We also have challenges that related to the methodology to measure. Reliability is a really good one from the perspective that there's not a lot of, a lot of states haven't done that, so we might be doing it differently. So we would reach out to some other states, maybe find some best practices to help identify the appropriate methodology that we can use to achieve the federal requirements. Again, we have, at the VTRANS level, measures that we've already established too that we'll need to continue to work through. But again, at that January meeting, we will present the bridge and pavement data and the proposed targets with the related measures. Through February and March, we would anticipate just going down that list of the different targets that need to be set and bringing to you each month a new set of data and proposed targets, and then presenting to you each time that methodology, any of the risks inherent with that. And the intent would be that at the April meeting, we would be positioned for the board to approve the proposed targets such that they can be submitted to the federal government in May. Any questions?
Patrick, I know you want to say.
I do, thank you, and thanks, Margie. This performance measure and performance targets are, in some ways it's a new thing, in some ways for VDOT, we've been doing it for a couple of decades now. In the area of condition, and really we have always focused on pavement and bridge condition as our core function, and everything else sort of radiates out of that area. And then in the area of safety, we have been measuring on all systems pavement condition, and I think you all know we've talked before that we rate every mile of interstate, every mile of primary, and 20% of the secondary system every year. So we're getting good data on the pavement condition, and that's how we develop and deliver our pavement program. On the bridge side, we're literally tracking our bridge condition on a daily basis. And Garrett told me yesterday that we crossed the what I'll call the 95% threshold, which means only 5% of our bridges in the Commonwealth, all bridges on our systems are structurally deficient, which puts us, if nothing else changed in terms of the rankings among states, it would put us near or within the top 10 states in the nation. So, but what we also see with this performance measures and targets, it comes out of MAP 21, and the federal government is trying to create a standard across the country. You'll see the American Society of Civil Engineers, you'll see ARTBA, the Road Building Association. They have different ways that they calculate and measure and come out with reports on the condition of the roadway system. So this is trying to bring it to a consistent standard. I will tell you there's certain elements of this that we don't think are the right things to measure, and for internally within VDOT, I expect our folks to continue to measure the things that help us in terms of predictive work, predicting when we need to do work on facilities, and also to get a much better handle on the needs in Virginia. As Margie said, the national standard largely sticks to the national highway system and the interstate system, except in the bridge area where it's all bridges. But in Virginia, the bulk of our assets that are maintained by the Department of Transportation are in fact off the national highway system, and we have as much responsibility to those roads as any others. But I think this is the area that is new for the country, frankly, are these areas of in congestion, air quality, connectivity, reducing signal occupant vehicles. All those things are new in this country, and so those truly are measures that we have not done before, and I believe that Smart Scale and the efforts we have used there, really what we want to do now is say, okay, how well is Smart Scale working? And this will be a tool to help us along that journey.
Yeah, and this is, we're sort of doing this, as you know, we had reforms where the Office of Intermodal Planning actually is the one working with VDOT to give to the board these measures for you to approve. And so that'll be, it's a good time now, as Charlie mentioned, there's new measures and stuff, and this for the board being involved and making sure you're seeing the measures, because at the end of the day, VDOT's charged and so is the board with meeting objectives of transportation. So I think they're working together. I know Garrett and his team are working with that, and so I think it's a great opportunity with these new measures that all this stuff, reforms in Virginia, are coordinating with it in that regard. So, yes, Mr. Kozinski.
A question with the current administration in Washington being committed to cutting back on over-regulation. Is there any chance that that would impact DOT with these measurements?
I can tell you right now there is I guess there's always that happening, but we have seen not much policy coming out of the White House right now, and in fact many positions still remain undone. So I don't see any specific. I remember P3s, we were going to be down that road, now we're off them. Charlie, you may know more specifically working with the administrator, but from the Secretary's office, I don't see a plan to do much of that yet.
I don't know that I would categorize this as so much as regulation as in creating standard performance targets nationwide. Does it involve additional effort on the part of the DOTs? Absolutely. In terms of accumulating data and doing the measures and all of that. So around the country, there is that impact. There are what I would call, there are things that if you don't meet your targets, but in some ways you almost set your own targets. So it's like you get to decide the grade scale you're going to use when you set the targets. You've got the targets need to match up with the kind of the national standard, but again, the penalties really are, if you're not meeting your standard in a broad sense, is you may be directed to use your federal dollars to improve in those areas. One of the things, we do a considerable amount of reports between what we have to report to the Federal Highway Administration, what various reports we make to the General Assembly, and even reports to the Commonwealth Transportation Board. And hopefully part of this will be, I'll call it a consolidation. A lot of people ask for things just slightly different, and frankly for my staff, we spend a lot of time doing a lot of data work that really is just sort of half a degree off from the previous question that was asked. So really I'm hoping that we can consolidate some of this information in more of a consolidated report that goes to the General Assembly, that comes here to the board, and goes to Federal Highway. And we may have more information in there than one of the entities want, but we can say, here's the document, and everything is in there.
And if I may add, Mr. Kozinski, members of the board, It's, there's a couple different things going on there. So the targets are set for 2 and 4 years for most things, and in many cases, we can adjust midstream. So we start getting additional data, we're able to assess the trends, we start seeing how our performance is, and we are able to do some adjustments. So that gives us some ability to avoid any kind of penalties. And even then, kind of the initial step as far as penalties really is, what is your plan to improve things? And we're already doing that in so many cases right now. If you look at what we're trying to accomplish with VTrans, there's certainly areas, pavement and bridges, and the condition there is one where we very much have a good understanding of what our needs are, what those investment decisions are that are needed to drive improvement in those areas. So I think there's opportunity to address things long before penalties would be really imposed.
Other questions, Ms. Ray? Charlie? Dang, everybody good?
Y'all were easy on me.
All right, thank you. And Margie, is the VTrans document, has it, or I guess it's on the, it's low, I don't have it. Well, you don't get a chance to review it because Nick didn't send it. But anyway, so he'll get that out for your review for the next meeting. Okay, Jennifer, I think we're down to you for your any reports that you'd like to go through. Charlie went yesterday, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the major one that I have that I'd like to bring it up, and actually, this is something that Nick asked me to bring up for you all. It's not on the workshop agenda, but it will be coming to you all for action in January, which is an amendment to the I-66 Inside the Beltway MOU. It is going to NVTC for action tomorrow night, I believe, and there's a few major changes to it, primarily to allow for toll revenues to potentially be used for 2 major projects in the future, the Long Bridge or changes to the Roslyn Metro Station. It is not changing or eliminating the I-66 Commuter Choice Program, which is, as you know, the program that provides for transit and bus service out of the toll revenues every year. It will still provide for a minimum of $10 million annually for that program. What it does is add the potential, those 2 projects to the waterfall of potential uses within the I-66 MOU. It also has one change that eliminates the restriction on the ability for NVTC to use toll revenues for operating cost. There was a limit on how much they could use, and that limit has now been removed from that. But like I said, it still provides for a minimum of $10 million a year for that commuter choice program, but just adds these as a potential use because they have a very direct nexus to the toll users of I-66. So this is a change that, like I said, is going to the full NVTC board tomorrow night, and assuming there will be an action taken there, it would come back to the full CTB for an action in January. So.
And that doesn't change the projects that you end up approving each year and the whole
Exactly,
bit.
yeah.
It's just expanding stuff if there is a desire for the board sometime in the future to do so. I did see, Gary brought to my attention there, I know the meeting, and I saw Kate back there, there's a meeting on Thursday night. They're going to be discussing the operation hours of Inside the Beltway. I just remind the board that is your decision. So any vote there would certainly, no action without the Commonwealth Transportation Board. So just a lot of different people unfamiliar with the process and what have you, but just I'm just assuring the board that is your decision based on recommendations from VDOT.
And I should clarify, I believe that the meeting tomorrow night with NVTC on the MOU is just a workshop presentation, but it'll actually be going to the full NVTC board for action in January. So let me just clarify that.
Jennifer, is operating expenses?
Under the changes that would be implemented, no, it would remove a limit. So I believe right now the limit, I'm trying to remember exactly what the limit is
50%.
50%, yeah, 50% of the revenues can be used for operating today. But this would actually take that limit out of the agreement.
Remember, as part of the 66 Inside the Beltway, we pre-funded the first year. We moved forward before toll collections to begin this expanded service. There's a lot of people saying, that has, that's not happening, and of course that's an untrue statement. That was part of the deal to pre-fund to begin the service at the same time, or in fact, some started before tolling actually began on inside the Beltway. So just again, setting the record straight as to what actually is happening inside the Beltway.
Yeah, and this, I mean, I believe the board, the NVTC board, will likely create a policy themselves on what they believe a limit should be on operating expenditure, or the amount of funding that should go to operating as opposed to capital. But this essentially puts it back in the hands of the NVTC board to decide what they believe that limit should be, as opposed to having it in the MOU.
Any other updates, Jennifer?
No.
That's it.
Yep. Well, one other, I do want to mention, I know you all had received a presentation earlier about our new intercity bus service, which is something we're operating with some of our rural transit monies. And this is a new service that DRPT is funding, and that service began last week on December 1st, and it is providing service in the I-81 and 66 corridors, primarily from Blacksburg in the New River Valley to Northern Virginia and into DC. So we're very excited about the service. It's called the Virginia Breeze. There's a website called catchthevabreeze.com. So anyway, it's a development I know that you all appreciated the support that you all had when we brought it to you all earlier. So we're excited about the new service starting.
Yes, Ms. Valentine.
Do you have any numbers yet?
I don't know that we have any I don't think we've got any ridership numbers yet, but when we have them, I'll bring them to you all. And that's all I've got.
Okay, just a couple of things. I see where, I know Charlie updated you yesterday on a lot of good things. I just want to mention one point. John, you took the check. Did you put the money in the bank for the 500? And actually, that money is in the bank, in our coffers. And I just want to point out, again, on the 66 projects, not only inside the Beltway of over $10 million a year going back into this agreement we just talked about with MVTC, and that is a minimum. There could be more because all of the money goes back through there after operations and Charlie maintaining the system. But outside the Beltway, not only the $850 million, I think, was the present value of the transit being paid over that period of time. The $3.7 billion project includes park and rides that will assist in a lot of this culture we're going. But a $579 million check up front delivering projects in Northern Virginia that would not have been done. No investment of regional monies in the project, either of those projects. All the money staying in the quarter. So I understand that citizens are paying, not only the residents, but also through traffic that we're capturing in the area. But all of that money is going back in the quarter, back to Northern Virginia. And when you combine that on the agreement we now have on 395, which I believe is $15 million a year of transit and multimodal solutions, you can see that there are many millions of dollars that are not going to third parties, but are going right back into Northern Virginia. And so I do understand that there are some who don't like tolls, but what I can say is they're benefiting that region. They are not going elsewhere. They are benefiting that region. That's how projects have been moving forward there in Hampton Roads, which I already updated. It's been the regional monies have been moving most of the projects in Hampton Roads. Not that the state hasn't participated. They do have some tolling also, but that's what's moving the projects. And again, all the money's there that stay in the region. So, Gary, you were asking about changes in terms of federal policy. In infrastructure, all we know right now is $90 billion reduction in the president's plan for the Transportation Trust Fund. We haven't seen a budget out of Congress. I understand they're going to kick it the debt, they're kicking down the road another 2 weeks to try to get through. But with tax reform, I think that's going to be difficult to see additional monies coming from the federal government. I don't know, maybe repatriation, although I haven't seen that so much in this tax reform. So, in fact, what I virtually see, if in fact you believe the reduction, the tax reform or tax cuts, whoever party's talking, does reduce the budget by $1 trillion, I think you're going to see cuts to other things, obviously. I mean, so I think that leaves it to Virginia and the states to deal with the resources we have. You all know, again, what we have, roughly $500 million every year to use for new construction and new capacity enhancements or smart scale enhancements on that. If you got another way that we can move these billion-dollar projects forward without using tolling and regional monies, I'm all for it. Because all I see the options are either do nothing or move forward under those parameters. And that's what we've done. And that is change. And that is having, by necessity, to have people's behavior change. Because we don't have the resources to do whatever. So that's what I would say. Listen to honest critics if you have a better idea, if you've got another way to solve the problem. And that we have tried to do. I just want to point out that how these projects are moving forward and how VDOT and DRPT are moving these things forward. A couple of other things. I don't know anything about the transition in terms of, other than I know I won't be here, so in that. But I have asked the transition team, I would really like for them to make the decision on the new secretary so that person could be here for the next board meeting. There's no guarantee that will happen, but I would like to see that happen because I think that would be a great precedent to set. And a part of the board meeting is handing it off to the new chairman of the CTB. So hopefully that moves forward, and I know the process is going, but at the end of the day, that will be up to the governor-elect in that. So in terms of other parts of the transition, I simply, I know they're working on cabinet level issues. But we've got, my word to them is we have a lot of positive things going on in transportation, and I would hope that they would see fit to keep that continuity in that. But again, that's from their perspective in that. Carol, I don't think I had anything else. I do want to talk about the, I know you all had a discussion yesterday about the resolution for DC to RVA, and I have some comments on that, but I think it's most appropriate to bring up when we vote on the discussion going forward. So, and again, I want to apologize for not making it last night. I understand you had a good time, but I am looking forward to the dinner on my last dinner, Last Supper, is that what it is, Marty? That's right. Coming up here in about a month or so, unless something happens before then. That could be a Last Supper well before then, so in that. So, and in that, I'll probably wait till the next time, but I do want to reminisce a little bit about some of the things that have been accomplished over the last few years, because I think if you would look back, I know I don't think many in the state or many in this room have thought we've gotten to where we are on some things, and that has come with a cost, though. That has come with a cost of time and a lot of discussion and a lot of political rhetoric, and it takes a toll in that. So I would say whoever my successor is, good luck, because it takes it is a personal toll. I had a boss one time, Marty knew him pretty well, Molly Joseph's father, Edwin Joseph, who told me that, you can accomplish what you want, but you got to pay the price. And, in business, that was making a lot of money, which we did. We paid the price for that. But in this, not about making money, but it's, in fact, I've never worked so hard for so little in my life as far as compensation in that. But there is a price to be paid. There definitely is a price to be paid publicly, criticism and the whole bit. And I can tell you, as I said earlier, how many times, how stupid we were that it turned out to be okay in moving forward. But it is a take on your personal life also in that, and just the constant, debates, I will call them, in terms of making sure we get stuff out there. But it's been worth it, and I'm comfortable we are leaving transportation in better shape than when we came in 4 years ago. That doesn't mean there's not a lot to be done. I think there still is a whole lot to be done in that regard. So anyway, you get to hear all that next week, though, next month in that. So, all right, if there's nothing else then to come before the workshop, then we'll bring that to a close. And we will now formally call to order the action item agenda for the Commonwealth Transportation Board for December of 2017. And the first on the agenda would be public comment. And I know we have President Robert Lindgren here from Randolph-Macon College. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary and members of the Commonwealth Transportation Board. I am Robert Lindgren, President of Randolph-Macon College in Ashland, Virginia, just north of Richmond. I thank you for the opportunity to speak here today, and my comments will be brief. Last month, the college submitted written comments as part of the DC to RVA process, again affirming our strong position that we oppose a third rail at grade through Ashland and our college because of the irreparable harm it would cause. Our stated in favored option is the Western Bypass option, AWB1. But with that said, I am here this morning to go on record as generally supporting the recommendation by the DRPT to the CTB adopting the 323 alternative for Hanover and Ashland. I say generally supporting that recommendation because I need to very clearly express, as the college's written statement did in detail, and as I stated at your November meeting at Randolph-Macon College, that by adopting this option, critical and major safety improvements will be needed in the form of pedestrian tunnels and bridges abridging the east and west sides of our campus to protect the safety of our students, faculty, staff, and visitors. In addition, let me take this opportunity to thank the DRPT for including, as part of its formal 323 recommendation, the important provision specifically prohibiting permanent property acquisition that would affect Randolph-Macon College's operations as a part of this DC2 RVA project. I want to close by expressing my great appreciation to Secretary Lane and to each of you and to the DRPT for your extensive and diligent attention to the issues affecting Ashland and the Hanover region. From the large number of visits and meetings that you've held in Ashland, Hanover County, and at Randolph-Macon College, to the convening of the Community Advisory Committee on which college representatives served, to the helpfulness and responsiveness of the DRPT professionals, and particularly Director Jennifer Mitchell, Emily Stock, and their entire team. All of these efforts have been greatly appreciated and valued. And on behalf of the students, faculty, and staff at Randolph-Macon College, we thank you for working hard to find a solution while working with us. Thank you, and happy holidays from all of us at Randolph-Macon College.
Happy holidays to you. Next up, we have Mr. Eugene Trowney from Virginia Commonwealth University. Good morning, sir.
Eugene Trowney, and I'm President Emeritus of VCU, and in contrast to the prior speaker, I do not speak for Virginia Commonwealth University in any way, shape, or form. That was from 2009, but I am merely a faculty member teaching. This is the third time I have testified in a hearing that I advocate, in the strongest possible words, a single station for the Richmond metropolitan area located at the boulevard. I know that that was looked at in the study. I believe the boulevard is a great location for that. It has tremendous assets, interstate access. It is much closer to the whole Richmond metropolitan area than either Staples Mill or Main Street Station, which is the proposal that is being recommended. The cost for a single station at the boulevard is actually cheaper by your own estimates than it will be for the two-station option. I do not support the two-station option in any way, shape, or form. I believe there are many problems with it, and among the problems that I hope you take serious consideration is the problem of the historical nature of the area around the Main Street Station. I have in front of me a copy of a letter that I presume you have seen from Councilwoman Kimberly Gray to Secretary Lane dated December 4th, and I will read you a portion of that letter. It is not a stretch to conclude that the Richmond Slave District in Shockoe Bottom represents the single most historic cultural and archaeological asset included in the Department of Rail and Public Transportation High-Speed Rail Study Area. And she says, I am among the thousands of Richmonders who are descended from enslaved individuals, many of whom were buried on or near the land needed for the expanded train station. The proposal calls for expanding the platform 1,200 feet. It will have dramatic impact on what should be venerated and really worked as a major national treasure to commemorate the 300,000 Africans who were brought enslaved and then sold out of that area in Richmond. I recall for you when Disney proposed a park near battlefields in Northern Virginia. It was 5 miles away. This is literally feet away, yards away from the expansion that is going to be needed for Main Street Station. So for this and many other reasons, I think you should seriously consider the only alternative in your own study for a single station that was acceptable. You've already said that neither Main Street nor Staples Mill would be effective as a single station. The boulevard would be, and I believe I'll be 10 seconds more, it will be attractive for the development of that 300-acre slot at the Diamond. Think how much more Amazon would be interested in locating its headquarters there if they knew a train station were going to be developed there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Happy holidays to you, too.
Thank you.
And then the mayor of Ashland, Honorable Jim Foley. Good morning, sir.
Morning, Secretary Lane, members of the CTB, Director Mitchell, everybody else. Happy holidays. I agree with everything President Lindgren said, and the town firmly stands in support with him. I picked up a new resolution, and it no longer mentions Randolph-Macon by name or the town of Ashland. So my suggestion is you might have to do some little wordsmithing before you vote. And I know what it's like to do wordsmithing on important documents right before a vote. It's sometimes a little awkward, but if you can be careful about that. We're looking for as much protection for the town and education for a future CTB board that narrow right-of-way simply can't support a third rail. And so anything you can do there to beefing up that language, we greatly appreciate. My only other comment is it talks about a future study for needs. I would say even before a future study, if we can keep talking about other alternatives. For example, using the right-of-way at Route 1. I think there are solutions out there that would be palatable to the entire community and still satisfy the Commonwealth's needs. So if we can keep working on that and not just punt 15 years and pick it up then, I greatly appreciate that. But thank you for all your work.
Holidays to you, sir. That's all I have is signed up, but would anybody else like to address the Transportation Board today before we move into our action items? Okay, seeing none, that's what we'll do. The first topic of discussion is approval of the minutes from October 24, 2017. Is there a motion? Is there a second? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Had a comment here. That was a subcommittee meeting that we had in Ashland. So that's right. So we don't have to approve any of those. That's a subcommittee meeting. Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay, next up, we have Bronco. Bronco's going to tell us about a few things that are happening, some naming. Good to see you, sir.
See you. The Secretary, Commissioner, and CTB board members, happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
I have two decision briefings before you today. Decision briefing number 1 is from the Charlotte County Board of Supervisors, Lynchburg District, commemorative naming of State Route 47, Crafton Gates Highway, Drake's Main Street, Tall House Highway, and LeGrand Avenue in Charlotte County as the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Highway. The Charlotte County Board of Supervisors would like to honor the lives and services of all Vietnam veterans and memorialize the 7 Charlotte County residents that made the ultimate sacrifice for their country. James C. Dickerson, MacArthur G. Samuel B. Hubbard, Wilbur J. Jones Jr., Roy D. Lowe's Jr., Leroy A. Whitlow, and Gordon P. Young, who lost their lives in the Vietnam War. VDOT supports this request.
All time.
I move the resolution and would like to say this is a beautiful honor for those who serve their country.
Comments or discussion? All those in favor, please rise. Okay, thank you.
Decision briefing number 2 is also from the Charlotte County Board of Supervisors, Lynchburg District. Commemorative naming of the bridge on State Route 40, Patrick Henry Highway over Louse Creek in Charlotte County as the Carter Thomas White Memorial Bridge. The Charlotte County Board of Supervisors wishes to memorialize the life of Carter Thomas White, a Randolph Henry High School student and a lifelong resident of Charlotte County, who was actively involved in his school and community and who died on December 2nd, 2016, in a hunting accident. The bridge is only a few miles from his family's home. VDOT also supports this request.
All time.
Move this resolution and just thank you very much for bringing this forward. He was an incredible young man. Thank you.
Second. Any comments or discussion? All those in favor, please rise. Thank you very much. Thank you. Happy holidays. Ms. Keene, Susan. Oh, there she is. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Secretary and members of the board. I have one action item for you this morning. It is a proposed limited access change on the Interstate 66 outside the Beltway Improvement Project. This project is located in Fairfax and Prince William counties in the Nova District and will widen the existing roadway with 2 express lanes in each direction, 3 general purpose lanes in each direction, expanded bus service, bikeways, trails, and sidewalk improvements. Both safety and operational improvements at key interchanges will be made and will ensure smoother transitions at on and off points at the exits. Modification of the limited access control along the existing I-66 and all intersecting roadways, I-495, Route 123, Route 50, Route 286, Route 28, Route 29, and Route 234 will accommodate the widening of the roadway and the construction of the sidewalks and a shared use path to be located in and through the limited access control. 3 design public hearings were held, 1 for each segment of the project during the week of November 13th. One was held for segment 3 at Oakton High School in Vienna. The one for segment 2 was held at Stone Middle School in Centerville, and segment 1 was held at the Piney Branch Elementary School in Bristow for the purposes of considering the proposed I-66 modifications. This project was endorsed by a letter by the Board of Supervisors of the County of Fairfax in October of 2015 and Prince William County Board of Supervisors in August of 2016. Federal Highway has reviewed this and has given their approval for the changes to the limited access on November 20th, 2017. The total cost of this project is $3.7 billion and is included in the public-private partnership between VDOT and Express Mobility Partners. I formally request your approval for the limited access modifications.
Hans.
Chairman, I move the resolution.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Ms. Keene.
Thank you, and happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Oh, Ms. Pryor, how are you? You're already coming up here. How'd you know I was going to call you?
Well, thank you.
Read.
You can read.
I have
Happy
two
holidays.
items. Thank you. I have two items for you today. The first is the amendment of several projects to the 6-year improvement program. None of these projects are subject to smart scale, and I recommend your approval.
Is there a motion? Second, any comments or discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, Ms. Pryor?
Thank you. The second item is my normal monthly transfers of surplus funds to scheduled projects, and we recommend your approval.
One second, we'll just divide them up there, Ms. Mathis. Any other comments or discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, oh, yes, Mr. Kilpatrick.
If I could, regarding I'll call it settling up on urban and secondary funds, if you recall, the state code prescribes that if these funds are not programmed, the balances in the counties and the urban system and the primary district formula are not allocated to fully fund projects, that the monies would roll to smart scale effective January 1. I want to report to you that all of the secondary and urban formula funds, the old funds, have been obligated on fully funded projects around the state, so that piece is done. On the urban system, we have some project closeouts that we need to do internally to zero out projects on the primary system, I'm sorry, and that's going to leave a balance of approximately $10 million that on January 1st will roll into state of good repair and be pushed through the formula. Because it is old smart scale money, it's existing money, we are actually going to be able to deliver some additional projects that are on the, if you recall in smart scale, you have this continuous list, and we'll be able to reach in and pull the next project or projects plural after it gets dispersed to the districts. And that will actually assist some of the local systems, the urban systems, and the county maintained systems also. So again, in terms of kind of settling up on those old formulas, and Kim, if I've said something a little out, correct me, but again, what we expect is about $10 million on January 1st to roll to state of good repair.
That's correct. And just to clarify, we'll continue down the list of state of good repair projects, advancing existing projects or potentially looking at new ones.
It was a little bit more, but we had to take some of it to reconcile some stuff, Charlie.
We did in the, I'll confuse myself if I talk too much, but it's a combination of the unpaved road funds that were distributed under the previous rounds. It created, and the distribution of the district grant funds under round 1 or 2. 1 and 2. And fundamentally, what's going to happen in round numbers, about $10 million is going to go back in. Some districts will actually receive some additional funds for round 3 in district grant program. It's not significant amounts, but there were some districts that the formula didn't work out right, I guess the best way of describing it. So we owe several districts a distribution of this $10 million. It does not impact any projects. All the projects that you have approved in Smart Scale are funded, and the unpaved road program projects are funded also. But again, this is, I would call it a reconciliation amongst the districts.
Okay, is there a motion? Oh, no, you already did it.
Already voted.
I want to.
You were good, that's right, so, okay. All right, thanks, Kim, happy holidays. Ms. Maxwell.
Mr. Chair, Joanne Maxwell from Governance and Legislative Affairs. This is the first action that this board will be taking with regard to what I'll call the policy index cleanup that was initiated back at the CTV retreat in August. What we've done is you will find 3 rather large attachments Attachment A, B, and C to this resolution. Attachment A is those policies that we are recommending that the board consider repealing. Attachment B are those policies that we would recommend that the board retain in the current index, and they represent policies we believe are current and still valid. And then attachment C are the policies that we believe need or warrant further review. What we're asking is that for purposes of attachments A and B, that you respectively, or that you approve repeal of the policies in attachment A, direct that the policies in attachment B be retained, and then direct VDOT and DRPT to continue looking at the policies in attachment C, which again warrant further review. Right now, what we're asking for in attachment A, there are about 403 policies that would be repealed. In attachment B, there are about 100 policies that would be retained. Attachment C, there are about 98 policies that warrant further study. So that's the first part of the action that we seek. The second part is that we continue to be allowed to look at the policies in attachment C. They will bring those back to the board in January and potentially thereafter if some of them are more difficult for final disposition. And then finally, we wanted to clarify that the repeal of any policy today does in no way affects the validity of actions taken under that policy prior to the repeal. So those are the actions we're requesting. What we're also proposing is that we establish an electronic archive of those policies that have been repealed today.
Approval of the resolution.
Second. Any comments or discussion? Yes, Ms. Hines.
I was the person who suggested this in motion. I just want to say thank you. This is a huge amount of work. It will make, I think, us doing our job easier once we get all the way through this. And I never expected it to happen on such a quick time frame, so I really want to thank people for that.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to say it is amazing how much had been accumulated, and I know it was because they wanted to have a record, but it's difficult going back through. So this is a good compromise. Pull them all out, and you can go back and look if you want to see a history, but you'll know what's in effect in terms of making decisions, and so much easier. So tell your team thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. Chair.
Any other comments or discussion? Question. Yes, Mr. Whitworth.
Just so I understand that all of these that we are repealing, we're repealing them based on what judgments?
Basically, we looked at, in some cases, law has been established that overrides. For instance, a very simple example is when the CTB established the pay back in 1920s for staff. In other cases, there are actually policies that were clearly rescinded by the board. They just were never removed. So those are primarily, in some cases there were redundant, literally just redundant policies. So those are the primary, really the primary bases for repealing.
Thank you.
Any other comments or discussion? Yes, Mr. Garza.
This was a result from our retreat, as was the orientation program we talked about yesterday, and I hope as one of your final messages to the new secretary that we could retain that retreat every year, because I think it's very worthwhile.
Yeah, in fact, I thought that probably is a good idea to do it sooner than later. Looking back, that's one of the things I hope they do, not name that person, because I have a lot of ideas, and that's one of them, is to have that relatively soon, so everybody can get to know each other, and also just sort of understanding what the makeup of the board and stuff. And look, now, it may depend on who that is. I was a member of the board, so that may, if that happens again, that may be different. So all 14 of you, I'll let y'all decide who wants to be it, but nonetheless, I agree. I think that is a good thing to do each year. And we don't schedule, 2 months, right, Carol? We don't schedule August, and we don't schedule for August and November. So November might be a good time, but depending on who that person might be. But there's some ample opportunity to do that. Yep. Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thanks. Happy holidays, Joanne. Okay, Ms. Brown. Good morning, Julie.
Chairman, members of the board, I have 2 agenda items for you today. Action item number 7 is a revenue sharing transfer in the town of Bedford and the Salem district. This request does comply with the CTB's new policy on revenue sharing transfers. The donor project is a completed revenue sharing project with a surplus of funds. Most of the remaining funds on this completed project will actually be deallocated, about $534,000. But the town did have an existing project that is already in VDOT's 6-year plan that is scheduled for advertisement in January 2018 that currently has a very small shortfall of funds. So this active project is currently funded with urban and federal funds, but has not previously received revenue sharing funds. The requested transfer of $4,640 will fully fund the existing project to match the estimate and will ensure the project is advertised on time. We request your approval of this request.
This would be Mr. Rosen. Is there a second? All those, any comments or discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Ms. Brown?
Action item number 8 is a resolution that will authorize the commissioner to execute the agreements for projects for the most recent round of selections for the Federal Lands Access Program. MAP 21 created a new Federal Lands Access Program authorizing use of federal transportation funds for projects that improve access to federal lands. The Eastern Federal Lands Highway Division has made a call for applications in 2016 and has completed its selections funding 5 projects in Virginia shown in Attachment A. Eastern Federal Lands requires a separate agreement for each project that receives federal lands access funds before they will obligate those funds. The Commonwealth Transportation Board must approve and authorize execution of this agreement with FHWA Eastern Federal Land since it is an agreement with a federal agency. The most recent call for applications was actually the 3rd call for applications, so this board has previously passed a similar resolution for the prior 2 rounds of selections. We would request your approval of this resolution so that we can authorize the agreements to be executed and get these projects moving forward.
Move.
Second?
Second.
Any comments or discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Ms. Brown. Happy holidays to you. Ms. Parker. Good morning, Marcy.
Good morning, Secretary Lane, members of the board. I have 2 action items for your consideration. The first is actually a rescission of a previous action item that you took about 4 years ago. In 2013, the board took action on discontinuance of a secondary route, which was a school bus route, 9399 in Stafford County, at the request of the county to maintain the road themselves. The county resolution stated that they wanted to discontinue the road, however, they used the code for devolution. So VDOT moved forward with recommending to you to discontinue the road, which you did in June of 2013, and you did do it under the proper discontinuance code. Earlier this year, we had a concerned citizen point out to VDOT that since the road serves a private subdivision, a county park, and the county school, that the definition for discontinuance was not met, and therefore the action should be rescinded in order to correct the record. VDOT has reviewed this request and recommends that the board rescind the June 2013 resolution discontinuing maintenance of Route 9399. This will allow Stafford County to review and take appropriate action on the future of the secondary route.
Before I ask Mr. Connors, this is an administrative issue to basically put us in the same place, but to get the record actually right as to the type of action that needs to be taken. So,
and in the case of this was if I recall, this secondary road was actually a school road.
Correct. It's a school bus road.
The provisions of the code relating to school roads are maybe a bit arcane. They have not been addressed in a long, long time, and so the original intent of that law was really to ensure that there was safe access to public schools in Virginia. Over the years, in many cases, local government and school boards actually don't want us to maintain these facilities because they want greater control, access control, and so on and so forth. So again, as Marcy said, there's a provision for devolution of roads. To my knowledge, we have never used that code provision, and that may ultimately be a path to take. But this really is a cleanup, because your action of discontinuance was not the appropriate action, so we're asking you to rescind it.
Lest you think our citizens are not informed and understand what we do, this is a good example. So we do have checks and balances. So, Mr. Connors, is there a motion?
Happily move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Comments or discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, Marcy?
The second item before you is the, yesterday I presented to you an update on the Governor Harry W. Nice Memorial Bridge, the project being administered by the Maryland Transportation Authority. As a reminder, there is approximately half a mile of work being constructed in Virginia. In order for the Maryland Transportation Authority to perform the work in Virginia, the two entities, meaning VDOT and MDTA, must agree on the terms of the work in Virginia in the form of one or more memorandum of agreement. So today we are requesting the board to authorize the VDOT commissioner to enter into any agreements necessary for the completion of this project, understanding that the commissioner must return to the board for any monetary decisions prior to signing any agreements that would expend VDOT funds.
Connors?
Move to approve. Thank you.
Second.
Comments or discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So, Gary, you need to report back that we are working with Maryland on a bridge. It's just not the one that you guys want us to work with them on. We're working on a bridge.
It's a start.
I would report that we did have that discussion yesterday.
Yeah, right.
Concerning the Legion Bridge as well, so.
It's a start, this choice. We've got the B word involved, bridge, just the wrong
right.
one, so. All right, Marcy, happy holidays to you.
Same to you.
Thank you. Ms. Renee Hamilton, the star of 66. Here we go. That's right. Here we are. Good morning.
Good morning. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I have 3 items for your consideration. The first 2 basically involves Arlington County, and we've worked with our 3 board members prior to the meetings. The first one basically states what we are proposing is approval and giving the commissioner the authority to execute the first amendment to the memorandum of agreement of transferring Columbia Pike, then State Route 244, was transferred to Arlington County back in 2010. The Arlington County Board would like us to amend the language in that agreement. The current language basically states that 2 lanes in each direction must be maintained at all times. They're recommending that we restrict the lane restriction be removed, and we have concurred with that by placing additional language that states that 1 lane in each direction must be available at all times for all modes. We have worked with them, and we basically agree with that recommendation.
Approval.
Comments or discussion?
Yes.
Just a question. Do we know what that would look like, what the plan is for that removal of that lane?
At this point, there is not a plan to remove that lane. Some of you may recall this was part of the streetcar project in back at the beginning of the Governor McCullough's term, where originally the concept was for a streetcar to run in the right lane, but it was going to also be open to vehicle traffic. I think functionally that would have been frankly difficult. I would not want a streetcar chasing me down the lane. But again, at this point, there are no plans to close the lanes. But from a traffic management perspective, we're comfortable that the facility will still work, and Arlington coordinated with Fairfax County also.
Chairman, if I might just offer a little bit too, I understand from the county planning staff that because the restriction has been there since the transfer, no study has been done on what might actually help maximize throughput in this corridor. And so the next step will be that they'll conduct a study. But the This corridor, some may know this, has the highest bus ridership in the whole Commonwealth. There are more than 18,000 people a day riding buses on here. So part of this is about wanting to make sure that the buses can continue to move along with all the cars that are going to work and then coming back. This feeds directly to the Pentagon.
And just, you know, this whole discussion started back with a combination of things, the streetcar, inside the Beltway 66, a lot of different things as we all work together. I mean, I know we're looking at some of these things today as individual, but this was a lot of moving parts to move all this forward. And this was some, I won't call it cleanup, but some things that Arlington had asked us to, VDOT, to work with them on in combination with a lot of big things that we've gotten done, just to be honest.
I would say the request for Columbia Pike to come from VDOT to Arlington County predates all of this and goes to issues in the mid-2000s where we were trying to put left turn lanes in and regularize those kinds of movements just to smooth the flow of traffic. It's a very busy corridor with lots of things going on.
That's my concern. For the horse a little bit here, or is there any recourse that is available if?
Comfortable with a single, from a traffic management perspective, we were comfortable with a single lane in each direction on this particular facility. So that's why, it's basically largely a 4-lane undivided roadway through a pretty built-up section of Arlington. This is right up around the Pentagon. It runs from Bailey's Crossroads to the Pentagon, and a significant amount of bus usage in the corridor now that's frankly taking up the space of the right lane already.
Also, I would like to add that it is Arlington's intent not to basically take away any lanes. They would just like to use the lanes differently by introducing different techniques of managing lanes, and time of day would also play a part in that as well.
This is them getting back around to what comes next after the, you know, the streetcar and planning forward for that too. Yep. So, other comments or discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right.
The next action involves the actual transfer of State Route 237, which is considered Fairfax Drive and also 10th Street, from the primary road system to Arlington County's local road system. It's approximately 6.6 miles of roadway, and the characteristics of this roadway is truly that of a local street. Although on one end you do have Route 50, on the other end Route 66. Arlington County is proposing to invest over $100 million in improvements along that roadway, and would like to basically incorporate State Route 237 in their system. So therefore, we're just asking that the authorization by the commissioner be given to enter into a memorandum of agreement with Arlington County for this transfer.
Approval.
Comments or discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Okay. Last one deals with our favorite project, I-66 outside the Beltway, and I gave a presentation yesterday on the concession fee. This resolution basically endorses the list that was given from NVTA, as well as the project that was added on Route 29 on yesterday. It allows us to move forward with the public hearing process, as well as making sure that the projects basically have all documentation associated with the federal and state regulations before it comes back to the board in January for overall approval. Also, we are asked, this resolution also asks that the commissioner be given the authority to enter into a memorandum of understanding with NVTA that really speaks to the roles and responsibility of this board as well as NVTA and VDOT on these concession projects.
For approval.
This is a big deal. I mean, guys, I mean, in fact, I see Grenly and Shannon and Marshall here. This will be a governor's release today. I mean, even you'll be taking action, but we want a governor's release on these projects. I mean, this is a big deal. Over $500 million in projects being put to work in Northern Virginia is one of the biggest things in the country. The largest concession like this for a new project. People have sold existing projects, but a new project for this. And so, you know, there's a lot of things that we get, you know, some things that don't people criticize us for. But this is a good thing here. Very good. So, anyway, we're a little surprised, quite frankly. Governor had a nice event and stuff, but it's interesting, they pick up on the toll inside and not much about a $500 million check. But fact of the matter is, this is hands off to Renee, her team, Charlie, his team, all those people negotiating and working with 66 and getting this done. I mean, it's a big deal for the region. So is there any comments? Or, yeah.
Mr. Secretary, I wanted to note the discussion that I brought up yesterday regarding Fairfax County. In the list in Appendix A, we have incorporated those 29 improvements in your recommendation, and it's $26.7 million, which rounds it out to the full $500 million have been are proposed to be applied to projects in along the corridor.
So all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The only negative about this, it would have been more if it ended up taking 6 months for the feds to approve the project. But we are where we are. What do they say? Pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered. So we got $500 million. So we're good. So, Ms. Renee, thank you very much. Happy holidays to you.
Happy holidays to you.
Yes. Here comes Miss Mitchell up there.
Okay, so we are handing out, you have revised copies of the resolution at your desk. We are handing out a second version of that, and please give me an opportunity to explain. And I apologize that I wasn't here for the full discussion of this, so if I mischaracterize any of the discussion that occurred yesterday while I wasn't here, please correct me. There are 3 changes that we have made to the resolution. The first one is, I understand that we were asked to add an attachment that explicitly shows the Tier 1 record of decision, which was referenced in the first whereas clause. So there's a new attachment A, which has been handed out to you, which shows that record of decision. And then in attachment B, we were asked to have an attachment that makes more explicit the specific recommendations for each corridor. The original resolution referred to them by alternative number, and so we've now included an attachment B, which has a map which shows each segment of the corridor and specifically the recommendation that is being made for each segment within the DC to RVA. Now, the third change, which I believe is going to require some discussion here, is we, at the Rail Subcommittee last month, it was recommended that we include something to direct DRPT to avoid permanent property acquisitions to Randolph-Macon College. And I understand there was some discussion yesterday, and again, please correct me if I mischaracterize this because I wasn't here, about potentially expanding that to the entire town of Ashland. So what we did was to, in the first attachment that you have, amended the language to reflect that we would avoid and or minimize any permanent property acquisitions to the extent practicable in areas where only 2 tracks on the current alignment are recommended. And obviously, that's only Ashland in these recommendations. But we also did that because as a matter of policy, we thought it was important to show that DRPT is being asked that where there are only 2 tracks to avoid property impacts. However, I understand there's also been some discussion about going back to the original language and limiting that only to Randolph-Macon College. So the copy of the resolution that we've just handed out has the previous language in it, which limits it just to Randolph-Macon. And so I think this may be where we need to discuss what direction the board would like to give to DRPT regarding this specific clause, whether it be just for the Randolph-Macon College or expanded to, again, where the 2 tracks exist in Ashland.
Make a couple comments, if I may, and I apologize for not being here yesterday. I do understand the board's, I went back and listened to a little bit about the fact that we're not trying to single out and that was a way to say we don't want to impact other areas either. I get that. But I do believe, and I've done my research, Randolph-Macon is the only college that's impacted directly by this corridor. I don't think there's any other colleges that set where the tracks are. And we have a precedent where we've done this before at Hampton University in taking right-of-way. So I have no issue about putting the 2 track in there too, or in addition to, but I did think it was appropriate because at the meeting of the committee, we did specifically say that we would not permanently take anything or any intention, as we explained to the audience and to the particular constituents, that we can't. Another board can certainly change a resolution, but on the other hand, it does signify what our intent is in that regard. So that's what I don't think we are. I understand about the 2 tracks. I don't think we're getting out of bounds by singling out the college, because I think it's the only one on the corridor. And I think that was important that we talked about that in Ashland, and we live up to that commitment. Yes.
As the person who made the suggestion yesterday, let me say I was surprised to see Randolph-Macon removed in the explicit way from today's resolution. I was actually thinking of it as an and, so that we would,
that would be fine,
that
yeah.
we would say avoid and or minimize whatever the language was.
Tracks.
Yeah, to the extent practicable in areas where there are only 2 tracks. That
would cover Randolph-Macon and the town.
I understand, but I want to say 2 tracks, and I want to specifically, my recommendation is specifically say Randolph-Macon College.
Okay.
So I know it covers it, but I think that was the gist of what we said. The 2 tracks covers the entire quarter, but Randolph-Macon's the only college.
And I think, you know, in this case, you're being more specific relative to Randolph-Macon by saying avoid, not avoid and or minimize, right? So, right? And then I would say we want to avoid and or minimize the impacts where practicable on the 2 tracks, right?
Yeah, that's where I was thinking we were going to.
Okay. I mean, as the person who brought it up, I'm quite comfortable with that. Or we can just say in the town of Ashland. I don't care.
I think you made a good comment. I think the board was right. Personal guys, you can chime in here. Was saying that at 2 tracks, that sort of limits it, but it does look at other areas that could potentially. But the college is the only one college that's there, so it's not a precedent. I just wanted to make the future clear, because we made that at that. I can't make a commitment for the board, but I said I'd make a strong recommendation to the board because of all the the relationship, and we do not want to do that. We're going to do some safety things up there we discussed, and I just wanted to make it clear. And it may be overkill, but it's specifically listed. I don't see where it hurts by naming, having the 2-track language, but then specifically saying and avoiding any permit to Randolph-Macon College. It may be overkill, but it just spells it out.
Secretary, I concur. I think we had the discussion ongoing that this is a long-term project. Who knows whether it will ever happen. But for other boards in future years to have that specifically outlined, I think is appropriate.
would you, oh, Ms. Hines, sorry. I mean, damn, I got down
Mr.
to the hall,
Dixon.
almost got through my last time, Ms. Valentine. That's right. Ms.
I'm
Valentine.
sorry. I even wrote an email to Mr. Dixon, so I just feel such a bond with you. Now, the one thing I have no problem putting Randolph-Macon in there, but isn't it our policy that we want to minimize this, whether it's 2 tracks, 3 tracks? I mean, we want to minimize the impact wherever we are. And so I would just make the point that our overall, I don't know if it's an overall policy that we have, but, you know, I've heard Ms. Stocks say several times, I mean, our goal, and you, that we want to minimize the impact in everything that we do in transportation, whether it's on 66 or, you know, so that was my one thing, you know, that it should be an overarching objective of ours.
Sure, and absolutely, that is part of what we do through the NEPA process as well, is to try to identify those impacts and do what we can to avoid and mitigate them.
So I agree 100%, but let's be a little honest. We took a whole year to deal with Ashland and the college. And so by specifically, I mean, you're right, Ms. Valentine. I mean, we do that anyway, but what we ought to, I'm just suggesting we put the 2-track and specifically name, that's over and above our normal custom. I mean,
My comments were really an to this whole process because there was some discussion about naming particular places or cities and then some people under the bridge and then Hanner. But our goal should always be that. I have no problem with putting it in this resolution, but it's our goal.
It is our goal.
Absolutely. So if I may, what I would like to propose is reading what I think we're now going to change the last, second to last whereas clause.
We haven't voted on this or anything, so I guess we don't have to go through adopt it. We'll just get it changed and then we'll vote on what we will say. Okay.
Nobody moved it yet,
Nobody
so we're
moved.
good.
Okay,
We're
great.
good.
So,
But I'll go ahead and read what I think I've heard. So the second to last paragraph would now read, be it further resolved that the Commonwealth Transportation Board hereby directs DRPT to avoid and/or minimize any permanent property acquisitions to the extent practicable in areas where only 2-track on the current alignment are recommended, and avoid any permanent property acquisitions related to the DC to RVA project that would affect the operations of Randolph-Macon College.
everybody, good?
Okay. Sound good? Okay, so we will make that change. We will send that over to Carol as well. So that would be, so I now recommend or request your approval of the amended and restated resolution for DC to RVA with the changes as described.
Is there a motion?
Moved.
Oh, sorry.
Moved.
Oh, that's your district, sorry.
Charles, you move. And then we like the second.
Second.
Ms. Valentine?
Thank you.
I'd be
Thank
happy to
you.
do it too.
Yeah,
so.
that's right. Is there any, Mr. Dixon? I had to get that in one more time. Mr. Dixon. Thank you for raising your hand.
In light of our recent communication from Richmond and Dr. Trani's comments, could you again kind of refresh our position or the position of DRPT as to why the Boulevard station was not the favored choice in the Richmond stations?
Sure, and there were a few different rationales that went into that. The first being, as you can see in the attachment A, in the tier one recommendation, and really all of the previous studies that have been done for rail service in this corridor have recommended that Main Street Station be retained as the downtown station serving Richmond. And really the policy of FRA is to connect downtown to downtown. So this recommendation would be consistent with all the previous decisions that have been made by DRPT and FRA in regard to this corridor, as well as having the 2-station alternative with Main Street and Staples Mill provides for essentially a downtown station as well as a suburban station too that offers more parking, that offers more passenger services, whereas Main Street would function very much as an urban station for the city of Richmond. So So the two-station concept is really designed because the two stations need to have each other in order to function well for the city. But we do believe that that provides the right mix and access for all of the region's residents to have that. The recommendation at Main Street Station as well, I know there was a fair amount of discussion yesterday regarding the Shockoe Bottom area and the historic remains or the historic resources that are down there. We have taken steps to minimize the footprint as much as possible of any, to avoid any impacts down there on the resources in Shockoe Bottom. As Emily described yesterday, our proposed design for Main Street Station with 850-foot platforms is all within the existing rail viaduct. So it does, really the only new facilities or the new infrastructure required here are some additional piers. And so while we're certainly extremely sensitive to the concerns that have been articulated on the resources in Shockoe Bottom, particularly as it relates to the slave trade, we have taken a lot of steps to minimize these impacts, and we would like to continue working with the city, with the stakeholders and community groups down there, and DHR, as well as the city, to make sure that going forward that any designs for Main Street Station continue to minimize any impacts in that area. So does that answer your question?
Specifically, the negative against the Boulevard Station was what?
I would say one of them had to do with the presence of adjacent land uses down there as well. There are a lot of, doesn't have the density there that Main Street Station has. It would involve a pretty substantial aerial alignment, including a loop track that would go through that area in order to have that station and support train movements in there, which we thought would have pretty significant private property impacts down there on the 300-acre parcel that Mr. Trani mentioned, but also some other adjacent properties as well. It would be, so it's not just the station that we look at for impacts, it's all of the supporting infrastructure and track that would be required for that too. It was pretty impactful. It would allow, now I should say that this alternative that you all would be recommending today, which is using again the S line, which is the easternmost line in the city, would not necessarily preclude a boulevard option on the S line in the future, should a future board decide to make that decision. Our recommendation, though, is for the Main Street and Staples Mill to be on the S line to be the preferred alternative for the city.
A couple comments too, if I could, Mr. Whitworth. There are some significantly held political views on all the different alignments. This is keeping in line with what is currently the alignment. In other words, this is not taking off what has historically been where the trains would go. Because we remember we got to go through, we got to have funding and the whole bit. And that's not to minimize the impact of what Councilman Gray and Dr. Trani have brought up. But that is not totally our decision because there are the Department of Natural Resources and are all involved in that. However, before any construction could happen, all that's got to go through. In other words, so that impact. If you go, have you been to Main Street Station lately and the investments they put in it? There is just an vocal amount of support and, particularly from the political about the investment they've made there, and the same goes with Henrico and Staples Mill. So because we don't have these billions of dollars lined up, another thing that went through is that we saw no reason to make a different alignment, in addition to all the things Jennifer's talked about. At this point in time, it's essentially the same what we did in Ashland in that. They're going to encumber other people, and we don't know where we're going to end up. But none of this, just like in Ashland, none of this can get done without, just like we go through on roads, other environmental impacts, all that's got to go through. So that is why we maintained another reason besides where the data led us of this alignment.
Mr. Chairman, just if I may,
sorry.
Obviously there has been an extensive discussion, debate across the region regarding the alignment. And the city council has supported, both mayors have supported Main Street Station because of the historical investment and commitment to that. The other issue is that the boulevard, although having much appeal, the reality is that it would completely disrupt what is one of the central largest parcels of developable property in the city. That there are, we talk about Amazon and these other things, that portion of the city, those properties are all in play, and to encumber that with a potential train station that may or may not be built for the next 20 or 30 years would significantly hamper the city's economic development intentions for that part, that region. And so, notwithstanding the significance and importance of that property and the historic relevance, right now the collective decision is, or support is, to maintain the current alignment.
I find that compelling. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Appreciate that very much. Is there any other comments or discussion on the resolution? All right. Is there, we already had a motion, correct? So yeah, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mitchell, for that.
Figure out who's doing our next item here.
Gotcha.
Oh, Mike's here. Okay, good.
It's called the statewide rail plan. Yeah, okay. Okay. Morning, Mr. Todd.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Thank you for having me. I'm here to present one item, action on the statewide rail plan. For about the last 18 months, DRPT has worked hard to develop a statewide rail plan that both meets Virginia's goals, but also is mindful of federal requirements for statewide rail planning. I also want to thank the rail committee members for their tireless work and cooperation in helping us make this a better plan. So thank you very much. With that, I request approval of the statewide rail plan.
Thank you very much. Is there a second? Any comments or discussion?
Secretary,
Oh,
I'm sorry.
sorry.
Court.
Mr. Rosen, and then we'll come back to Mr. Casper.
I wanted to just make a couple of comments. Firstly, there's a new station policy that I guess we're going to adopt separately.
Yes, that's correct. It's included in the resolution that it would be adopted separately.
So that, in terms of passenger rail and moving forward, that localities really understand, if we're to get another stop, really understand, what the expectation is of them in terms of, when the state makes such a big investment and the jurisdiction is a significant beneficiary, from that investment, that the locality needs to be a part of making the overall program work. Secondly, because it's the first meeting since Amtrak started in Roanoke, I do want to thank DRPT and the Secretary and others for a great inaugural event welcoming the train to Roanoke. I think everyone did a great job on that. The excitement in Roanoke is huge, in the entire region. Virginia Tech is tangible. People are planning trips months out, and just wanted to thank everyone for that and for that special day. That was first time since when that passenger rail
60s.
So thank you everyone for that. That was a very special day for us. And
not me. That's right. That's right.
Marty was just turning 50.
That's right.
But thank you, really. That was a great day.
Has, just as a side, ridership continued well there? Yeah, that's great.
I don't think we have any final numbers yet, but we'll certainly provide them to you at the next meeting and let you know. So,
Mr. Secretary, I'd like to echo comments I made in yesterday's subcommittee meeting. This has been a year-long process, and I think the interaction between DRPT and the subcommittee has been exceptional. It's really evolved. I want to credit everybody involved with bringing good ideas to the discussion and ultimately creating a great plan. I think the other thing that will come through very clearly in reading the plan is the importance of rail, both from a passenger perspective and certainly from a freight perspective. So I encourage you all to read it. Past the executive summer, as we say, there's some good detail, and I think it'll be very clear just how important rail is to the future of transportation in Virginia. Thank you.
In that vein, the relationships we keep with our two Class 1 railroads are going to be paramount in delivering that plan. So, interesting. Yeah, Ms. Valentine.
I would just like to add to this, too. You all have done a great job, and it really has been a great process this past year. One of the things you'll notice in the resolution is that we are actually directing DRPT to continue working in trying to determine a fiscal impact of rail on the economy of Virginia. That as we've done this, this particular draft of the rail plan does not include the impact of job creation, tourism, or tax generation, which other agencies within transportation do. And I think if we're really trying to, determine the impact and how we make investments, that we should have a very clear understanding and a consistent understanding of what that actually means. So that work is going to continue, and it is not a part of this rail plan. So, but thank you, and thank you, Ms. Mitchell, for your willingness to do that.
Other comments or discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Happy holidays, Mr. Todd.
To you too.
Mr. Brule. There's Jennifer.
Members of the board, item number, I believe we're on 16, is a resolution requesting your approval of a memorandum of agreement with the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, Potomac-Rappahannock Transportation Commission, and VDOT and DRPT relating to the I-395 Express Lanes annual transit investment. We briefed the board back at your October meeting, and since that time we've continued to work with NVTC and PRTC to finalize the terms of that MOA. There is one change from what was presented in October that I want to bring to your attention, and that has to do with funding for operating. The overall amount of funding from the annual transit investment that can be allocated towards operating has not increased, but we have included some additional flexibility for NVTC and PRTC as it pertains to multi-jurisdictional projects, which would allow them to fund operating over a longer period of time than what was in the original draft that we talked about in October. So with that, the MOA is ready. What the resolution today does is it authorizes the commissioner and the director to execute that memorandum of agreement on behalf of the board. And with that, we recommend your approval.
Do you want this money?
My region wants this money. So I'm happy to move approval.
Second. Comments or discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Brule.
Thank you.
Happy holidays.
Mr. Secretary, if I could just make one comment. I think it's really important to call out the work of the administration on these large projects, making sure that there is support for multimodal improvements. Makes a huge difference in our highly built-out corridors to have the dollars to put these new services out there. So thank you very, very much.
I think the region, we still haven't come to grips with what is somewhere, well, right now, we know it's 25 million, 15 on 395, 10 minimum out of inside the Beltway. And when can we get done with outside 66? But that is a continuing investment year after year for the next 50 years, and what that impact is going to be. And that's another reason, again, about, I know, again, back to these tolling and all that, but where we might be a year from now is completely different than where we are now. And that's why I think patience and understanding of what we're trying to do will lead us, I believe, in the right direction. Mr. Kilpatrick, do you want to say something, or is that for the next item? Okay. So I do think, but I think that is something that right now is just sort of, well, it's a, a comment, but that money flows year after year. And I think there can be meaningful change in those areas.
Truth of the matter is people can't choose something that's not there. And
That's right.
so if we want them to choose transit to not get in their car, then the transit has to be there from toll day one. And I think that's been part of the wisdom in these deals, is to get that money flowing early.
Well, we'll see. But anyway, I agree. Thank you very much. That's right. So
We're already seeing it.
I know we are. We are seeing it, and that's so. Okay, the next item on the agenda is an action on V-Trans, and of course, this is the presentation Nick did. Charlie, did you want to explain sort of what this means?
Yeah, absolutely. So the resolution.
We'll decide if you want to vote or not, but I'll let Charlie
The
explain.
resolution, there's really two, be it resolved. The first one is approving the methodology used to develop the recommendations and adopt the V-Trans Tier 1 recommendations. And I know that staff and Nick have worked with each of you individually on those Tier 1 recommendations in each of the 9 districts. So that's the first be it resolved. The second limits the what I'll call advanced activity, what's in the resolution, of VDOT and DRPT working on project development relating to concepts that enhance the capacity of the surface transportation network be limited to the adopted Tier 1 recommendations. Now that can be weighed by the Secretary of Transportation on a case-by-case basis, and is also not limiting the assistance that we provide with localities in the application of smart scale, in developing smart scale projects to move forward. And Nick and I have discussed this is not intended to impact things like the installation of traffic signals or safety assets that this really is about not working on capacity projects unless it's in V-Trans. And that's sort of fundamentally it, of what this resolution proposes. And I think Margie's going to correct all the things I said wrong. Am I good?
I think that's,
All
so
right.
look, and the whole thing is this development of, remember we started this all about talking about, we do these long-range planning and then we put it on the shelf, and this is all about not limiting VDOT, but making sure that in terms of capacity issues, it's stuff this board has said we want you working on. It's back to the prioritization. Now, so the issue is here, you have been through this, but we didn't go through it. If you would like, we could hold this off until January, or if you feel comfortable, you've been briefed, I'm happy to move forward. So, Mr. Kaspers.
Secretary, I'd like to hold off on it. It's a complex issue. There's just a lot of detail that I think we should.
I think it's so important.
It is. It's critically important.
I would like to wait, too.
That doesn't hamper us in any way, does it, Charlie? I don't think so.
I don't believe so. Margie,
Yeah,
are we okay?
Yeah, okay. So we'll delay this action until January. But in the interim, let's get the report out, and so that you'll have a chance to review it, ask questions, and then vote in the January meeting. Okay. All right. That brings us to Mr. Solly's and the bids and, well, actual contracts, I think.
Mr. Secretary, members of the board, I have 4 projects to bring before you today that require board action to award. First project we have is order number K90. This is a project for the I-264 Witch Duck Road that's adjacent to a project that's ongoing now. We had 3 bidders, which is reasonable competition for a project of this size. It is shown slightly above the budget, remembering that the budget is based on historical data. The low bid and the second bid were within the range of the engineer's estimate, so we're recommending award to the Lane Construction Company.
Yeah, I have to abstain.
Okay, then, Mr. Johnson, would you like to make a motion to move this contract forward? All right, is there a second? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, contract moves forward.
I'd like to congratulate Mr. Johnson on his
First vote, okay, it's first motion over there. Any idea what you voted on, Steve? No idea, I know, did so. Yeah, so, okay. You might get to vote a lot. Mr. Malbins, he's got his hands in a lot of stuff, so he.
Mr. Williams, too.
I know, that's right.
Second,
Yeah.
just a question. So we acknowledge that we're $5 million over what we estimated. This was is this a smart scale project?
Partially.
Partially, yes.
It was funded by, the 2 funding sources are Smart Scale and HRTF, or the HR TAC funds. And this is a case where This is of the HR TAC, I'll call them the HR TAC projects. This is the first one that has come in above the estimate. It still falls within the budget of the project, but would require us to reduce the contingency from 10% to 5%. We've already discussed with HR TAC, and I'll call it a reconciliation process. We have several projects, including the widening of the next project the 64 phase 3 that came in well under. And so we're going to go through a reconciliation process with them. We will actually add on the smart scale side, it's about $1 million of additional smart scale fund that we would allocate to this. And that is allowed within your smart scale policy. It's under the threshold that staff can do that. And then the balance would be smart scale funds. At the same time, we are going to refund to them, or unobligate is a better way of describing it, unobligate HR TAC funds on High-Rise Bridge and Segment 3, and there may be another project. There will be smart scale monies that will come back to the state also for reprogramming on future projects. So again, the way this works with HR TAC, it's proportional, and there will be a net gain to the smart scale program with the HR TAC project, because there will be money flowing back that we can then reprogram in round 3.
Mr. Williams.
Fine. I just think it's important we know if there's going to be a shortfall, how are we going to cover the shortfall? Okay.
They can't put money on it without your approval, but.
You got to watch them.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough, Mr. Williams.
I'd just like to add that if you like, I mean, we certainly have established a pattern here now. And if you look at if you're looking at a contract for $75 million or more, it's 90% chance it's going to be in Hampton Roads or Northern Virginia. It's because of those regional funds. I know we're doing a great job statewide, but without those regional packages, we really wouldn't have much of a transportation program. And
no, and in fact, we had some of those issues earlier, certainly during the election season, where others thought we were just concentrating just on those areas, and sort of said it was like why Jesse James robbed banks, because that's where the money is.
Paying the taxes.
And they're paying
and
it.
Locally, and they're building the projects. Without it, I don't know that we'd have as much to do as we do up here.
So in our discussion earlier, in terms of, look, transportation funding is not going away in terms of a discussion. We know we now have limited resources, and what, we've sort of, the last 4 years really showed what the consequences of that are. Not all are all bad, but they are. But as a funding source, it's declining. I mean, our reliance on fuel taxes is declining. So we're going to have to come to grips with how we're funding transportation, not whether we think it's politically correct or not. We're going to have to, because that's going this way. So and I think some of the rhetoric we get on tolls, because there are those, user fees, or should it be more like a sales tax? And then that's not just in highway projects. We're having that issue with Metro. In other words, we really get tied up sometimes in form over substance as to how we fund things. But the fact of the matter is, the Transportation Trust Fund, because of the collection of fuel taxes, is not a sustainable long-term funding of transportation. And that's going to have to be done on the national level, at the state level, and I think some of these screams and yells and other things that we're hearing are a result of, how are we going to fund this? I mean, really, what is the right way? And that's why I say we're all ears if you got a better way. It's in how we're doing. But you're right, Mr. Williams. I think the General Assembly was, regionally is how I think it's going to get done, and unfortunately, there are some regions that the taxes collected still wouldn't be enough to move projects, and so that means it's going to require another discussion of how we're going to do this. So, okay.
Secretary, I think that's an excellent comment. That relying on the gas tax, that trend is not going to change, and actually it may significantly accelerate in 2021. So we need to start having discussions now how to come to grips with that and start understanding what type of enhancements have to be done if we're going to maintain this construction program. And the General Assembly is the one that needs to start wrestling with this issue, but now's the time to start developing a strategy to maintain a level funding stream before we experience significant declines, before we have put something in place to deal.
There are significant ramifications. That's one of the reasons why I accepted doing this new position, is because what we're talking about are taxes that have typically been used to fund general fund activities, sales taxes. We're talking about, so now we're going to be competing with education and health needs, other things, when you start talking about that as you move away from user fees. And so I think there's going to be broad-based changes over the next few years, and a lot because of a result of that, because now it's not going to be as clear-cut as what's a general fund in our terms and what is a specific use fund, because more and more are being funded by those things that were traditionally general fund reserve. And we've already seen that at the national level. I mean, every year, Congress since 2008 has to appropriate significant billions of dollars just to keep the trust fund up to the level it was because of their decline. That's going to be the same thing in Virginia. So I think it's going to be a significant political debate, you know, and how we do that. That's why I think things like we're going to have to come to grips with taxing internet sales. I mean, you know, we're just going to we're using 20th century collections of revenues and not recognizing a 21st century economy. And that's really what's at the basis of this. And, you know, and as you know, change is very difficult and very loud, particularly as we go through it. But could not agree more, guys, is that, and I think it's not 20 years away. You know, that's, you know, in that, so. Okay, all right, so next project.
Thank you. Next project is order number 426. This is a Richmond District annual paving schedule for latex modified slurry. We only have one bidder. That's normal for this type of work. And we're recommending award to Slurry Pavers. It's a good value.
Mr. Brown.
Moved.
Is there a second? Comments or discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Opposed, okay. One opposed. Who's opposed?
Next project is first of our design build projects. This is I-66 eastbound widening inside the Beltway in Fairfax and Arlington counties. We have 3 bidders, as is usually the case on our design build work. The Lane Construction Company gave us by far the best proposal. We're recommending award to them.
Signs.
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Comments or discussion?
Yes, Mr. Secretary.
Yes.
I think with all the hullabaloo about 66 tolls, when the survey crews go out and the construction starts on this particular project, it's going to open up a lot of eyes and make the quality of life a lot better for people who are traversing into the district every evening and no longer have to face that backup for 2 miles or so once you hit the toll road coming off on 66.
No, I agree. I think that was a topic of discussion, and people want to know the status, and so they'll now know that. And you know, I've told them we'll be doing construction next year, but now they'll be able to tangibly see the contract being let. So,
Mr. Secretary, I'd also point out that there's some other really elegant solutions that our Nova VDOT staff came up with relating to how a number of ramps intersect with the existing grid and to getting the bike trail up over Lee Highway at a place where we've had just tremendous number of accidents. So this is, I think, a win. You know, as much as I would have preferred to wait on this particular project personally.
Oh, you
Mary,
would.
come on, Mary.
What can I say? But I think in the end that this is a good set of solutions in a place that has a lot of different kinds of congestion, and I really commend staff. You know, I had to say something.
I know,
right?
I was on the ready. See, now I got accused yesterday by Mr. Latorno that this is an Arlington project. So I said, well, it is, because it goes through them. I guess it is, but in that regard, so.
Not one
But
we
anyway,
advocated
no, it is right. I mean, yeah, what Mary's talking about, there was this long discussion on triggers and different things, and anyway, I think we reached the right solution in moving forward here. And by the way, this construction will be done in non-tolling periods. You know, we're not, you know, so we're not going to be having that impact the algorithm. So
The rumors, tolling period's only like an hour a day, right?
That's right. No, that's right. Yeah, that's right. So, and that's, again, couldn't use it legally before, but let's don't quibble over facts on that regard. So, okay, Mr. Solis.
The final project for today is the I-64.
We didn't vote.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Hold it. We got to vote on this. Daggone, I'm having a hard time today. Okay, any other discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Great. You know, Marshall, this should also go as that in the news release too, that this was voted today, and construction of that 3 miles in there. So, okay, now Mr. Solis.
All right. The last project is I-64 capacity improvements, segment 3. This is a little over 8 miles adjacent to the piece that's under construction now. We got an excellent value from Shirley Contracting. We're recommending an award to them.
Secretary, I have to abstain.
I was going to just call on Mr. Johnson just out of habit here. Mr. Johnson, is there a motion? Is there a second?
Just a, well, sorry.
Yeah, Mr. Brown.
Well, I'll second, but also had a question for discussion.
Yeah, okay.
Just noticing the significant variation between the estimate and the bid. Just trying to understand why that's such a wide gap there.
I'm Brian Stevenson. I'm with Alternative Project Delivery Division. There was some estimates put in place, some risks that we thought were inherent to the corridor, that as we put in competitive bidding, some of the design build offers were able to do it with a much cheaper option.
Shirley Contracting was awarded phase 1, and they had a significant lower bid. Their approach to
I was going to point out,
$20
that's a
million.
good point, but they delivered on phase 1, and they were a lot below. And, you know, we said that budget's on project on time. It was, but as Charlie and I were talking, they actually delivered it a year earlier.
They did. And Mr. Brown, in terms of our estimating, we create a budget. We're doing it to make sure we don't miss anything. We're not doing it to win the bid. And that is sort of a fundamental difference with how, when we do our estimating process. We're really pleased with these numbers. I think that what you're going to see, we're going to be able to continue to get better in terms of trying to, ideally you want what we've put in our budget and program to match up pretty closely with the bid. Talking with the chief engineer, we do have some concerns that at some point there's going to be an inflection where bids come in above our estimates. It'll be a combination of cost of materials, and it may ultimately be a lack of or limits on personnel available to do projects, because we are going fast and furious in Virginia. So what will happen again with this money I mentioned earlier, this reconciliation with HR TAC, and this project also, Kim, this also has smart scale, doesn't it? It does. So it has smart scale funds, and on a pro rata basis, that smart scale, those funds, which I believe were high priority, we'll come back to the state and we'll reprogram those funds also. This project also has a pretty healthy incentive. Phase one, and as the Secretary mentioned, we actually, and I'd sort of forgotten this detail until the contractor reminded me. He said, "You remember you cut a year off the contract right before we accepted bids," and we did, and they achieved it. This also has a pretty healthy incentive on it that's built into the budget, and I fully expect Shirley, as they've done on segment one, they'll go hard after that incentive. Segment two, Alan Myers is building that currently, and they're really making good progress. The other thing is, this leaves about 30 miles. All but 30 miles of from Richmond to Hampton Roads is either completed or under contract. So that's, just think about the amount of progress we've made. Governor McAuliffe was very strong on unlocking Hampton Roads and connecting 64, and we've got all the hard parts under construction, or under contract. We've got that piece in the middle. I'm confident we'll find a way to close that too.
And the reason I raise it, and I know Mr. Williams wants to jump in, but the reason I raise it is because obviously the estimates impact your smart scale scoring process. So I guess part of my question was, did this go into the smart scale scoring process at 243? And so should we then revisit some of our other 64 segment estimates to see if they can be tweaked, because obviously that would make them more competitive if the cost actually were to come down significantly.
It went in at the higher cost.
Right.
So
right.
It didn't get, yeah, but
to your point, we want to be diligent about not over budgeting, because it does add, I'll call it, adds negative weight to a score. It makes it more difficult to score well. At the same time, we don't want to get into a case where we've lowballed that it comes in and then we're struggling to deliver the project within the budget. So that is a balance, but we're continuing to try to make that tighter.
Mr. Williams.
Where the credit really lies for this delta that you see in the estimate in the bid. I mean, when we first started talking about this project, Charlie, we were talking $300 million for this segment, bridge work and stuff on it. But the design build program that VDOT has really mastered the concept.
I was going to get the design.
Getting three really good teams on board, and they know what their competition is, and some of that risk that we used to plow into the specs, they're taking that risk now, and for the most part, they leave happy campers. We don't have any disasters on our hands where the contractor says, I'm sorry, I thought I could do it and I can't.
So it's highly unusual to go to a claim hearing on a design build contract.
I remember the price when Shirley priced the first phase. I'm like, good gosh, they left some money on the table. They were thrilled to do it. Did it ahead of time, received an incentive. I mean, y'all's design build program is like the best. It is the best.
Wow. We're going to see that when we do the next one, I think, in a second here in that regard. So any other comments or discussion? But it gets a good point, and I think they're getting better at that. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? I'm sorry, did you have something, Ms. Hines?
I just say.
Oh, okay. We did vote?
No, we did.
Yeah, we just did. That's what I thought. That's right. So, okay. That's it. So, for the most part, still good news on contracts. Charlie and I were talking. I mean, depending on where you are and the type of work, we have some issues. But generally, in these urban areas, I think the limiting factor we're going to find is qualified workforce, I think. And I think with the awards today, it's over $1 billion under construction now on Hampton Roads. And we've got billions of dollars. And I mean, I think there's, Charlie's got HRBT coming down the road. So a lot of good stuff happening. When do we start, and Mr. Brown, when do we start in Richmond? When do we start that project on 64 here in Richmond, Charlie?
I'm sorry?
The 10 miles from 295.
It's a 5 mile. It goes from 200 to 205.
Yeah.
It's been awarded, and I would expect that we'll see some work either in the winter or early spring.
Yeah, I think when people see that, then they'll see the ends connecting, and I think that will give the same thing here. So, you know, look, wish we had monies that we could just award the entire 60 miles or the same thing on 95. You know, we don't do that, but I think smart scale, the way it works, and that's what I tell people, you know, we're incrementally getting it done, and obviously it makes sense, and that'll pop up there, because if you've been to 64 lately, coming out of Hampton Roads, no more Patrick Henry backup. Now it's right after you get past Fort Eustis Boulevard. But in Lee Hall. But that's what I'm saying. In other words, and so it'll eventually pan out that way. So we're implementing. But if we had the whole 65, 70 miles now, the traffic, you wouldn't do it anyway, Charlie, because you'd have all the traffic stop. Yeah, and that stuff. So anyway, so I think we're making good progress across there. So
I do want to add, Mr. Secretary, that so the Secretary and I attended the Richmond Regional Transportation Forum, and I opened my comments at the end of that session. Secretary opened the meeting, I kind of closed it, and I told folks I was going to, you know, use the same Baptist sermon that I'd used the last 2 or 3 years, which is talking about regional funding. And we had the Richmond TPO there, MPO there, and I gave some very stark examples of projects that were funded in Northern Virginia and funded at Hampton Roads that would not have been funded but for the regional funds. And I stressed to our region that absent a change in program, when we do get to the more traditional pot of $500 million a year, or every biennium for construction improvements, that the Richmond region's ability to compete without its own funds will be significantly hindered. And surprisingly, there was a lot of positive responsiveness. There have been some recent changes in the local governments that I think folks are open to that. But again, when, you know, to Mr. Williams' point, you know, you're not going to see a $200 million project come out of Richmond without Richmond and the Richmond region bringing their own dollars to the table. And, you know, I'm not, you know, trying to sugarcoat it. I'm just being very direct and very blunt with folks that we're looking at $20 million roughly per mile to do 64. So we're talking about a $600 million project. That's not going to happen in any 1 or 2 or 3 smart scale cycles if we don't get our own money on the table. So again, I commend the Northern Virginia region and the Hampton Roads region for coming together and doing that. And anyone who's listening from Richmond, you guys better get on board.
Mr. Secretary, I think your mantra will have to be passed on, that even less resources have even more consequences.
More consequences. Well, the only good news about that is eventually, hopefully, the other regions will finish building. I mean, in other words, I mean, you think through that. I don't mean that to be, but it is difficult. And I can tell you, there are some. I mean, I tell you a big thing that we're going to have to come to grips with as a state, not necessarily in transportation, but Southwest Virginia, even with these tools, even if we gave them, they couldn't raise enough taxes. I mean, so that's a big discussion. I'm not saying I have the answer about anything or what's right or wrong, but I do understand some of their frustration in that regard, because. You know, what is it? What do we figure? Well, I don't know, how 100 million a mile to go somewhere in the coal field?
Yeah, and some of the terrain out there, the coal fields, it's $100 million a mile.
Regardless of whether you like the project or not, that's the terrain they deal with. I mean, it's going to be difficult, and I think that discussion will, you know, is going to come not only in transportation but other issues in the Commonwealth. Mr. Casper, did you have something, or are you just looking at me like? Shut up and move on.
Funds have done is made us more creative, and I think, and more efficient in the process. So I would say there's been some beneficial consequences of dealing with the limited funds, which we've risen to the occasion.
Back to I agree with you. The necessity is the mother of invention sometimes. I get that, and I think you have, but I don't believe we could have this discussion about additional funds if the public doesn't see this construction. You know, in other words, so that's critical. I think now we've got a lot lined up, and VDOT's executing, and DR, we got it, but that's it. We're not going to get much if we don't. I mean, look at the microcosm of the metro. Fair or not, a big part of that's tied up into whether or not those funds were used appropriately. And so I think the more we show that they are, I mean, people complain, well, I don't get this under smart scale. The issue is that they're not going to get it under any scenario other than the fact that the way we were before, your politician went in and made some deal and you got a project, or not even a project, you got some money allocated that never did. So I think we've done a good job of laying that out, but it's all coming down to continue to deliver. And then I think, because the public's going to have to say, we got to get behind this. And I think that's a key part to where we are.
Mr. Secretary, at the end of my first meeting, I'd just like to thank you for the time and effort that you've put in. I recognize that you were the chairman of the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel Authority, and for me to take this position, I had to resign my position, if you will, with the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel Authority. And your laser focus while you were there, and while you've been here for the last 4 years, in making sure that you look at the real issue of limited resources and how to best use those limited resources, and expanding your thoughts and ideas on how to be creative and looking at new construction concepts. As an example, the really full and effective design-build program for some major projects.
Thanks, but it's been a team effort, and I'm glad you're part of this board, and I think you're coming on at a really good time and pretty exciting time. So thank you very much, but look forward to it. And yeah, I know John takes all the credit for that tunnel over there, but I had to stand up in all the public hearings to get it going. But anyway, no, that's right. So, any other new business for the board?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I'd just like to report under new business that yesterday we did have the opportunity to brief the board on the new orientation program, and that Grinley is going to be honchoing that to make it a reality that we hope to deliver in May or late spring, before there's a potential turnover of quite a few members of this board. Right. So
thank you for taking that initiative on, and I do think that's another important part of the continuing what we're doing here at the Commonwealth Transportation Board. Okay.
I just have a quick question. I noted regarding another bridge that crosses the Potomac, I saw where there's federal funding for work for the Memorial Bridge. Do we have a timeline?
Yes, the Park Service got in their budget the remaining funds that were necessary to put with the grant they got the previous year to complete that.
Any idea of the project scope?
So I'll call it a major rehabilitation of the bridge structure. I don't know what the total price tag is now, but it's several $100 million to restore and rehabilitate so they can remove the weight posting. We've been coordinating with National Park Service and especially Federal Highway, which will actually deliver the project for the Park Service. It's going to have some disruption in Northern Virginia just by its nature. But again, we're continuing to work with them, but it's a several $100 million project.
Yes, I had that whole discussion on where the bridge is actually located, and contrary to what some people believe, it does not touch Virginia shores. But it's still important for our Virginia commuters, and so in that regard, VDOT is helping, in coordinating with that. So. Any other new business?
Chairman, Mr. Chairman, right here.
Oh, yeah, hey, Pat, how you doing? Sorry.
I just wanted to update the full board on our very vibrant meeting this morning. The Innovation and Technology Subcommittee, Mr. Johnson attended, and we appreciate your participation as well. We drafted and adopted some guiding principles for the CTB's Innovation and Technology initiatives, and we'd like to bring that to the full board for their consideration and review. I also would suggest that there's a lot going on, especially with the data portal and some other things, and hopefully we can maybe schedule something for the next meeting or even in February to give the full board a briefing on everything that's going on, because I think that they would benefit.
It might be a good one. And I appreciate your email you sent me the other day, just regarding transition stuff, so thank you. Yeah, that stuff, I did get it, so.
Thank you.
Other new business. Okay, well, We have one meeting left. What is it, the 8th and 9th? Or 9th and 10th, sorry, 9th and 10th. And I hope everybody has a great holiday season. And I'm hoping at the next meeting, we'll be passing the gavel to the new chairman. I look forward to wrapping up with you and spending some time. Again, I apologize for last night, but I do want to thank everybody for all their, the last few years. It's been great. And of the one thing there are some things I'm not going to miss, but I am going to miss the camaraderie of this board. I am. I've served on quite a few boards, and I, don't find any other that really function and put the time in and effort that you guys do. So I am sincerely thankful for you for that effort. And look, I hope you guys have a great holiday season, and we'll see you in January. So with that, we are adjourned. All right.
Did they fly you?
We'll see you in January. So with that, we are adjourned.